do have a quorum of 4 members. And so, with that being said, call the meeting to order and ask for an approval of the agenda. Are there any additions, corrections to the agenda that anyone cares to make? Hearing none, the agenda stands approved as submitted. Future topics of an anticipated subject change, anything there?
Nothing for me. Other than a reminder that fall once again gets very busy just in terms of budget season, annual plan preparation, those items. So
Yes, I believe our preliminary budget meeting is due in October. Is that correct? It's due
we'll
for
do our
public,
full,
due for public view in October.
yeah, we'll have a preliminary draft
Preliminary,
in
yeah.
September,
Yeah.
another review in October, and then we have an opportunity to go final in
Yeah.
November or December. Yes.
Any public comment? No public comment? Okay, thank you very much. Minute approval, any additions or corrections to the minutes from the July meeting? Hearing none, minutes, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the July meeting. I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Motion second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Oh, Jim, raise your hand. Yeah, I can say it. There you go. There you go. Thank you. Appreciate Jim making himself available for this meeting so that we have a forum. And I do appreciate that. No action items, particularly today is discussing a variety of topics that are being presented to us. And Scott, I'll let you kick it off in terms of the draft funding.
Yeah, before I pick it up, I want to acknowledge this document, which is produced on an annual basis, is a collaborative effort. However, Manager Speedman was the one that puts this all together and drafts the annual funding plan, and then we collaborate. There's a lot of back and forth that goes into it. She sets up community outreach sessions. Tries to attend this year, I think, because that's gone. But one of the tremendous amount of work that goes into this every year, and it's always a little bit awkward, at least in my mind, because we start this preparation really in July to have it kind of ready for the initial draft sometime in August. We like, from a rhythm standpoint and order of operations, we like to present this to this board first, so you all can sort of review the draft, provide us any input you may have based on what we've collaborated on, and then it starts to go in front of other boards that have to look, review, and approve this as well. So what you have in front of you is, I stripped out the childcare piece. If you would like to see the full draft, I think it'll be published in the clarity here shortly. There's some minor revisions that I think are being done, but they're not over the material. There are a couple. On the housing piece, there are a couple things that it took me 3 times to read. That I made a couple of suggestions and small edits, but again, they're not material in any way, shape, or form. So, with that, hopefully, you've had an opportunity to review it, large part, and Carly, step in if you have anything else to add to this. But in large part, we're on the housing portion, we're keeping status quo, so to speak, similar plans, similar priorities. Obviously, as the program and our efforts sort of mature a little bit, the focus becomes more on the ground up development than some of the acquisitions or land banking opportunities that came across our desks in earlier years. And now the focus really shifts to hopefully being able to provide lower income housing opportunities for our workforce and others in the community. And I think that's somewhat reflected in this. I'm missing anything?
I just really quickly, I wanted to expand on your comment about the timing
Yeah.
and how odd that it is. And even we have the report itself or the plan itself is actually a requirement of the IGA between the county and the town. And what's required of that is the next year's projection of revenue and then the split between housing and childcare. Anything beyond that is kind of what we do for sake of transparency and really making sure the public is aware of the intentional use of these dollars. Obviously, at this point in July, when we start drafting this, we only have revenue from this year through April. And so when we work with Visit Estes Park for 2027 projections, the number that you see here, over $6 million in revenue is significant. And that may change by the time that this is actually adopted at the end of the year. The other timeline piece with that is that this gets approved with the town's budget. So in alignment with their budget process through the fall. So we do have to kind of do a lot of things early on, and we're barely finishing our 2025 impact report when we start working on this. The other, so I'm working in 3 years at once, it feels like most of the time. I'm like, what year are we even in? The other piece I wanted to add was just as far as outreach goes, in addition to those public meetings, we also had an online survey that was open for a couple months. So that outreach is, and the results from those surveys are included as well. And then of course, one-on-one stakeholder conversations that we have with stakeholder conversations with partners within the community as well as the region. So yeah, that's all I had to add.
I'll call out one piece I think might be important because it is a different. We called out seasonal housing specifically, I think, for the first time in this draft. And that was done for a few reasons. One, we wanted to highlight, and because we haven't explicitly discussed it in this document before, we have brought solutions to bear using 60. Jessica might have to help me with the numbers here, but I think we have roughly 13 units across the portfolio this year that are dedicated to seasonal. That represented just shy or right around 30 individuals, which we've never been able to provide solutions for that subset of the workforce in the past. So that is one of the items that significantly Fall River Village allowed us to participate in. And we've had quite a few internal conversations and exchanged some documents back and forth about how greater solutions can be brought to the seasonal housing front. We certainly know how important it is and always has been to our community, and will continue to be, and if not, even ratchet up more in its importance with some of the large commercial projects that are occurring, whether that's the Stanley, Elkhorn, Craggs Lodge could play a role as well. There could be increased pressure put on sort of that seasonal workforce. So we threw in a little blurb about it. We continue. It is part of our focus. We think programmatically there is some space, and Eric and I spoke about this a little bit to help provide some solutions, as that is sort of a 60 mandate. Beyond that, it becomes a little bit more complicated. I shouldn't say a lot more complicated, because if you're planning on a vacancy rate for seasonal housing of 40 or 50%, financially that solution becomes extremely difficult to come up with. And really all you can do is throw money at it, which we are stretched very thin and have other priorities. Just wanted to highlight that piece, that it is a significant part of the conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we try to navigate within this plan are the ongoing conversations that are not just happening with the town board and pursuing, an understanding of seasonal housing needs as well as senior housing needs, but also the development code and the outreach that's been conducted with the updates with that. So all of that information is taken into account with these objectives, but at the end of the day, we also have to filter through the 60 ballot initiative language that is very specific to workforce. And so that being said, this draft will be presented as a report discussion item, and it was just moved actually to September 8th. So this will be presented at that meeting again as a draft. And then also that same night, there is a study session for seasonal and senior housing. So that'll be a busy night. And again, we try to address those ongoing conversations in the annual plan, knowing that this is a pretty high level document and that continue to be reactive and responsive to needs in the community as well.
Housing has been an issue since this organization was put into place. And it has been the position that seasonal housing is a responsibility of private sector. Because it's seasonal, private sector employees seasonal housing. Further, Scott has said, yes, I recall discussions in the past, each of our properties is independently financed by that property. And if you have properties that are about 50% of the time, that puts a great deal of stress on financing on wherever it is. All of the villages allow us to do some token of assistance to the seasonal housing business. Have a private citizen who my brother, who is working at a company to try to ingest into the community a private developer for seasonal and long-term. And we met with, I met with Dan Dork, who is a CEO partner for the Holtz company. They had a meeting on both Friday and Saturday of individuals from the community dealing with bringing in a corporation to build housing for us. I'm not sure that we want to go there, but it was an interesting concept. It reminded me very much of America West because they built lots of housing across the country. So we've got a huge interest in dealing with housing. And it's an issue that will continue to be discussed, particularly amongst the town and also the house consortium. Relationship to how do we address seasonal housing? Do we address seasonal housing as an issue? I think our primary focus is on permanent employees, our permanent residents of the park. But we're going to increase interesting questions about dealing with the population and others. Additional.
A couple of
Insight, okay.
Pete spent much more time with that group than I did on
Yes.
Friday, so I wanted to get a chance to weigh in if you had anything to say.
Yeah, I mean, I spent probably close to 8 hours with them on Friday, so learned a lot about the J1 and the seasonal housing program, both from the sponsor of the cultural exchange program that business gets. It was interesting learning more about how they went about and constructed those dorm style type residences, which is something that with the updated development code, we would probably need to address to make sure that type of housing is allowed. But yeah, it was interesting. I mean, their model was a little bit different where they'll put 4 people in a room together that'll also have like a little bit of kitchenette or something. And then they typically charge between like $120 to $140 a week, depending upon the their market. So just round it up per $150 for simplicity's sake. That would come out to $600 per person per month. And then if you have 4 people in there, that comes out to $2,400 a month. So they're actually making a fair bit from a per unit standpoint, but then the vacancy and seasonal aspect is certainly a concern. So it's a different model than what we've done previously or what our, core competencies are. So I would be supportive if they're able to come to the market and try to accomplish something like that, because I think it would be a complement to what we're able to do as a housing authority.
Have they done this other places?
Yeah, a bunch of things.
And I think one of the, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So they started up in Wisconsin Dells, which I've learned is a water park mecca. They have 4 or 5 water parks there, and a lot of the growth has been founded in that seasonal housing. And they house 5,000 J1 visas in Wisconsin Dells itself. So the vast majority of the workforce there comes from the J1 visa program, which isn't exactly the same as what we had here in Estes. And then they work in Myrtle Beach and Dollywood and some other seasonal tourist housing markets.
So the water parks in Wisconsin are open in the winter time.
Some of them are actually. They've got
They are?
parks. Yeah, they're really moving to try to make it a full season.
Wow,
thing. So
they
a
must
lot
be
of-
inside.
Yeah, a lot of things are pushing inside there. So I had the same question.
Wow.
Yeah, I think they also have properties in Myrtle Beach and other.
Yeah.
Other areas. But, and I still have some questions about, you said we had 30 J1s in our 10 units. What's the number? I've asked this question now 3 days. How many people do we have that are J1 students in our units?
I was just putting down J1 questions, because what I found is when you speak of exchange students only, are they only serving exchange students or seasonal? Because we have 3 different categories of seasonal workers that come here to Estes. We have internationals that just come on their own and not work with an agency.
Some work with J,
Yeah.
they're not on the J1 visa.
Exactly. They're just here on their own accord, internationally traveling from Turkey. So we have half of our inventory are those, and then half of our inventory is J1 specific, working with an agency. And so that would be a question to that number, like, do they exclusively only work with visas, or because there are a big population in Estes that comes not on visas, that just come internationally on their own. But we have 3 units that are specific J1 master leasing, 4 per unit, 2 per room,
Yes.
and they pay $800 each per room or per person. To meet all of our master leases have the 80% pricing, because they have 4 incomes. They're up there in that tier of 4 people in that household having 4 incomes. They're above that 80% AMI mark, so they're getting charged the $2,095. And for J1 specific, we cover utilities and internet for J1s. International students that come in on their own, they're on their own with utilities, internet, and they pay us directly. We don't work with the master leasing, we don't work with the employer. So 6 of our units, those seasonal workers are paying us directly.
So to simplify this, it's 32 seasonal workers, regardless of the category that they fall.
5%.
Make another note on the developer conversation, we're gonna touch on it for the next item as well. But roles, and organizational roles are important when we talk about implementing solutions in anything across the board, but certainly in housing, because the housing markets are extremely complex, and the development code plays a significant role in what we can bring to the market, or any private development can bring to the market. And in rather substantive conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago with town staff regarding the development code, we wanted to make sure that there was space in there for dormitory style development or redevelopment where it makes sense. The draft did begin to touch on that. But given sort of the recent research work and sort of where it appears this is going, we didn't feel that development code quite far enough to allow true dorm style options. So I think town staff agreed that they're going to work with the consultants to discuss what that could look like in the future iteration of the development plan, and hopefully we'll incorporate that so that the development plan provides an opportunity for that style of development.
Yeah. At this stage, it's being developed for development. It is not being terribly flexible in terms of relationship to housing density bonuses. Rather much the same as was case development. So this code is more restrictive than what it was 25 years ago. And that particular development code tended to reduce the size of projected population. So this one does the same sort of thing. Sustainability.
Can I throw something? Sure. I think the 30% very early draft certainly had some concerning areas. Didn't, in our estimation, as housers, provide enough opportunity for housing development in the community. I do think this process is extremely iterative. It involves a lot of stakeholders, the entire community. And I think we are trending in a direction that I think more approximately moves to the middle ground in that, where it's not moving as far as maybe pure housers in the room would like to see, where we believe it should go. But there's a lot of factors to balance in there. I think if we fall somewhere in the middle, across all the levers that need to be pulled, whether it's about density, setbacks, other items in the parking requirements, that sort of was thinking of. I think we are trending in a positive direction that does provide us some additional tools from a development code level as we proceed through the drafting process. So I think we are trending in the right direction. And again, I think as most negotiations sort of go, if you end up somewhere in the middle, that's probably an appropriate place to land. And I feel as though, from my perspective, that's sort of the direction we're going.
Any other questions? Again, I think the J1 and seasonal workforce. Again, I think the primary responsibility for the development of that type of it's the private sector. We can do some token work with it as we have done. But I think the goals for this organization for the Estes Park housing is long-term, full-time, permanent residents. So that being said, let's move to the 2027-60 funding plan draft.
I think Jim had a question.
Jim.
Oh, hold on, Jim.
Hang on, Jim. We
Muted.
can't read your lips.
Okay.
Okay, there we go.
Going back and looking at the MOU, it talks about a broad and brief review, and things are approximations. I have no problem with 2027, but I totally don't understand where the numbers come from for 2028.
That was something that Pete brought up too.
Yeah, I can touch on that. Yeah, Jim, that was one of the sort of revisions that I think you'll see in subsequent versions of the 2027 funding plan. Largely those numbers were static, or status quo from the 2023. I almost said 22 because it was subsequently drafted in 22, the last housing needs assessment. So those were sort of some of our best forward-looking statements at that time, based on what we believed sort of was in the pipeline. And so we've stuck with those numbers, but now that we're nearly 4 years past those, the boots on the ground reality has shifted enough to tell us that, hey, this is probably more what's feasible and what isn't. And those unit counts by 2028 are essentially zero. At this point, we would have had to have shovels in the ground at this stage. So if we move that timeline to 2030, we're looking realistically as a pure guess at this stage, because there's a lot of factors involved in terms of new development, maybe 50 to 100 units by 2030. So I think you'll see a shift in the revision there based on boots on the ground reality to more accurately reflect what is both physically feasible and financially feasible. Because if you do basic math on the 50 to 100 units, you're looking anywhere most likely from 30 million to 60 or 80 million dollars in total funding that would be required to make that level of unit count happen. And that obviously can't come from a single source. And all the funds that we go after are highly competitive. So it's not only predicated on getting a project through entitlements where you can put a shovel in the ground, but also funding those developments as well. So it's a complicated landscape.
I would concur that got the target of 2028 with 300 to 400 units.
That's from the needs assessment.
Yeah,
So that's what we've been
that is,
using as our metric since the needs assessment.
landlord.
That's how it's in every funding plan, we've utilized that as a metric.
I think do something that's a little bit more realistic, particularly in relationship to presenting this particular document to the public.
Well, and I think it's also important to recognize that this is not just those numbers or that needs assessment is not just for the housing authority, but it's for our entire community to look at workforce housing units. We also have a new addendum to our needs assessment that will provide more information for those future community-wide metrics.
Think so if housing authority has presented and participated in drafting this particular document,
Mhm.
then I think the housing authority needs to be identified with at least its letterhead or its logo. We have the logo we have here, logo. And this assumes, I assumed when I read this, looking at that this was solely the results. And I was on yesterday was what's been
Yeah.
in this situation because there's where does it identify the housing authorities were involved as an independent entity for having input. It appears to be strictly the town's plan.
The plan itself is presented as it required through the MOU or the IGA with the Larimer County, which is a town's responsibility to provide this plan. I'm happy to go back and chat with leadership about including your logo and continue that conversation for sure. We also, Scott and I drafted a rules and responsibilities specifically for this plan and what my role is in drafting and what his feedback is and how we draft the objectives. So I'm happy to share that, or Scott wants to share that with you. It's definitely something that's evolved over time since we started in 2023 to, where we are now. But that draft as the rules and responsibilities was to provide clarity of, who is drafting it and what is the level of feedback and accountability to that plan as well.
Just, did not seem to identify the housing authority as having any input in this, so it read as if there was some. But it also did not identify the housing authority as an independent agency. And I think it's important for you to understand. Again, as Scott has pointed out, so we pointed out, so the housing authority is not a branch. And I think that's important to understand when you talk about the housing authority in relationship to doing and building housing for the workforce and for our seniors and for those people low on income, that it's the housing authority responsibility as part of their mission to deal with those.
And
Or it reads as if it's the responsibility of the town justice department to do this. And the town justice department only has a pass-through funds. They are not in the housing business.
correct. And
They're in the child care business.
what my role is housing and childcare, and my role is to be accountable to both housing and childcare dollars. That's what this plan incorporates, both of those things, and the town, and my role is to draft the plan in full coordination with the housing authority. I'm not devaluing the role that I look to this organization for leading all of those initiatives, but very specifically, my role is to create this plan and to steward its dollars. Otherwise, I wouldn't have housing in my title. And I don't know if maybe in the draft, the introduction piece was removed. If you only gave the housing portion, but the 2027 overview definitely refers to the MOU between the town and the housing authority and the role of the housing authority. But I'm happy to go back and make some edits. Again, this is a draft, and provide clarity. But I do, in the impact report and in this, try to be pretty clear on that relationship. And I think, because we even had, there was a comment about the creation of it.
Yeah, it's in here.
Okay.
Eric, I certainly understand your point, and I think to sort of substantiate what Carly's explaining is it's a complicated web here with it's technically VEP tax, which then the county has oversight over, the town has oversight over. We are the entity that has an MOU signed with the town to implement solutions using 60. So I think what we're trying to do here and what Carly's doing in drafting this is really trying to fill the wheel in the web of all those sort of responsible parties that have input into the plan. And I think each year when she drafts this, we substantially use the same language year over year. And I don't think the plan is to use Carly's phrase, which I liked, is devaluating the important role that EPHA plays in this. And not only in the workforce housing space, but housing in general, right? We play a much more broad role in housing solutions than just workforce housing. And I think that is recognized, and it certainly is recognized, I think, and acknowledged when we discuss in meetings or one-on-ones or in public hearings about this plan. I think the role that EPHA plays is adequately explained, but I also acknowledge and hear your point that we could maybe tweak some verbiage around just to highlight the significant amount of collaboration on housing that does make sense. So I think I'm hearing that Carly and I both acknowledge that, and we'll work with our other partners to see if we can maybe tweak it to highlight that a bit more.
I think it's clarification. Beneficial to public understanding of the relationship. Yeah. Anything else? Jim?
Yeah, I just thank you. Thank you all for that input. And for instance, Carly, Scott, on page 24, there's a statement to the effect, EPHA anticipates something. And so I just want to make sure that if that language is there, we all agree with that. And that was just one of my questions also. So thanks for the clarification.
Thank you, Jim.
Anything else on this draft report? Pete? Pete, you finished? No? No?
We covered everything.
All right, moving along. Item number 2. Preference letter and
Yeah, sorry, I realized item number 1 and number 2 are the same sort of discussion items. Apologies. So item number 2, and this is a good segue, and we don't have to spend too much time on that, but I did want to provide you all with a letter that I did sign on to along with, I think, 12 other agencies in the state, through Colorado NARO, requesting through the qualified location plan process that Chaffin goes through every 2 years, which the qualified application plan is much like what you might think it'd be, or is. Thanks today. That is the plan that essentially guides how Chaffin allocates the funding that they're responsible for allocating, most significantly, how they divvy up federal low-income housing tax rates. And what we have done this year, as some of those conversations progress every time we go through this process, is we request a formal carve-out for additional preference points as part of the QAP process, specifically for housing authorities in the state of Colorado. And we see the need to differentiate ourselves in the QAP separate and differently than other nonprofit developers. It is not overly onerous or difficult for a nonprofit to be formed and created, but they are essentially still a private entity looking to do development. And housing authorities in the state of Colorado are purpose driven. We are created the communities saw a need in their community, and then we're governed by the state statute for the sole purpose of providing housing solutions to the communities that we serve. So I want you to be aware of the requests for preference points in the QAP that has been communicated through this letter and subsequent white paper to Chaffin. And then also, I think the white paper that was actually, to my recollection, drafted a couple of years ago. There may have been a few iterations of it, but substantially this letter is not new. And it's a conversation that we have often as a leadership group amongst other CEOs and EDs in the state. That I think this white paper spells out very clearly and articulately of why PHAs exist, the work that we're tasked with doing, and why that matters, and why we believe treating us different in the QAP process is important. And we could do a whole session on this. I'll just draw 2 lines of direct comparison with this in real terms. We have a few powers that extend beyond what typical municipal governments do. Actually, we have more than a few. And one of those is our ability to take on debt. We are formed to take on debt. We have sales tax exemption and property tax exemption for projects and expenditures that meet our mission by state statute. And another item that happens is when we, particularly those entities that do their own development work, of which we are one, when we collect development fees or acquisition fees, those funds get directly funneled back into our communities. And that's one of the items that makes us substantially different than private developer, say, out of Wisconsin or Ohio or Florida. where they're gonna take that development fee, they should be compensated for the risk that they're taking on, the work that they're doing. So that money then leaves the subsequent community once they're done. Whereas entities, PHAs that do their own development, like EPHA, those funds stay in our community. They help us operate our agencies. And largely those funds get funneled right back into future projects and as part of the capital stack to make us. And locally, we have done that using developer fees from Talents Point and Falconbridge to help us develop Peak. So that's a local boots on the ground example of how our agencies do some of the work that we do and how those developer fees help bring additional solutions to the community. So I wanted to put this letter in front of you. I also sent it in an email. It's no different, but I sent it to you all, including our town liaison Frank, just so it was in front of you and it's separated unique form. Because again, I think the white paper explains why we exist very clearly, and I think it's an important reminder to that. Any questions or comments? I'll add one more thing if there are no other comments. So it's a shocker, I'll keep talking. The common topic of conversation in a monthly call that I'm part of, again, with other housing authority leadership around the state, is, and which we have generally been somewhat, I'll say, insulated from. And that is the conversation of our involvement in special limited partnerships, for having private developers come knock on our neighbors and it's for our involvement. That often happens in larger communities along the Front Range, on the Western Slope it occurs, even in the mountains where the primary model for a lot of housing that's developed in ski communities is based on private developers doing the work, not housing authorities. And most large agencies have explicit SLP partnership policies that are published on the website. This began to be a conversation, if you recall, with Fish Factory and America West, as the town and America West began exploring. It was largely felt in one of those iterations that our involvement was going to be necessary to be able to make the project financially feasible. And that was primarily because of our sales tax exemption and property tax exemption. We do have to hold those powers very close. And realistically, they should only be leveraged and used in the SLP configuration if the project that's being discussed could not otherwise come to market. Right? There has to be substantial public benefit, and that public benefit isn't just meant to line a private developer's pockets or nonprofit developers' pockets in terms of profit. There has to be a substantial reason for market to private development. I bring this up only because with all the commercial development going on, your discussion of the seasonal housing options and solutions, this might become a greater topic of interest to this board, and it may require us to I will probably start working on a draft that we're prepared to have an SLP partnership policy in place, so that we can point to a forward codified policy that says, if you look to partner with us and use some of the tools and powers that we have, these are sort of the criteria that has to be met for our. So that's kind of why I bring this up with this letter in front of you. It's really just a primer, reading some writing on the wall, some decisions that we might have to make in the future.
Good. Anything else? Any questions? Okay. Financial review, item number 3.
So we're in August. If each one of each quarter, it's a little difficult. This should become easier over time after our system conversion upcoming here in October. So breathing down our neck. But Q2 ended obviously at the end of June. July's board meeting, it's a little tight to turn around quarterly financials that tight, which is why we're doing this conversation in August. So in front of you is a snapshot. I think you're relatively familiar with this stage. It's meant to be a snapshot looking at the large, big picture financial metrics of of all of our properties. I will be blunt in that I did not have an enjoyable time for this report today. In my 8 years of essentially overseeing this side of the operation, this was the Q2 was challenging. I'll put it that way. Q2 was challenging financially across the board for operating properties for a number of reasons, primarily due to maintenance related items. And those cover the gamut. Unique unit needs in terms of turns, capital investment in turning those units. Labor played a role in that, which required us to go outside to some contractors where we were normally able to do some items in-house, which of course increases expense. Those are the large themes across several properties we have a couple properties specifically that are under some financial pressure when you're just looking at the first 6 months of 2025 in terms of their operating positioning. We have a few, I think, there are 2 properties, and forgive me, I don't recall off the top of my head now, that some of the cash draw or the draw on cash and NOI through the end of the Q2 was impacted by something that is outside of the operation, and that is financial expense, and specifically tied to mortgage interest payments. I believe there's a couple properties where they're over budget by anywhere from $12,000 to $20,000. I believe these are tiny accounting entry issues, not actual issues in terms of the budget by comparison. And I say that because this is one of the easy things, or should be one of the easy things to budget. We're simply going off an amortization schedule that is set at the moment we take on the debt. And that's how I build the budget, is based on the amortization schedules. But as you go through the year, there will be timing issues depending on when those payments are actually processed when the monthly policy books are closed. There are also a number of accounting issues primarily related to EPHA 6D, where accounting has some entries saying that need to go back to 6E. And I think that's more of an education piece for the accounting team of how and what the sources and uses of the funds were. They're not overly material amounts of money, but we're working through some correcting accounting entry. We are largely, I have to give kudos to the LHA accounting team. I know this has been a topic of conversation for a couple of years at this stage. They have gone through a lot of transition. Their entire staff has turned over a couple times over the last couple of years, including leadership. I have confidence in the existing or the current leadership team. They have been tasked with doing a lot of cleanup going back both. It's primarily related to bank reconciliations going back nearly a decade. Again, none of the corrections over the material, but Misty is putting in that work to go back and have her team make sure that everything is substantially correct. As part of this review, and packet in front of me is our completed finalized 2025 financial audit, which was once again a clean audit opinion, meaning the auditors believe our financials are accurate, accurately represented for standard accounting rules and regulations. So I say that to mean there's no cause for concern or anything, but there's been a lot of work that that accounting team has put in to make sure that everything is accurate and up to date. But we continue to work through 6, which I think provided us some negative impact through financials.
For you, format question here. The title for this is end of quarter 3, 2025.
Yeah.
So that needs to be corrected before it is distributed. Please.
Correct.
Questions? Anything about a little disturbed with our auditing company that it's taken 9 months to get us an audit for 2025, or I'm sorry, 8 months to get us an audit. Figures, something that we should have been. So whether would be any looking at the auditing company or whether there would be some rationale other than the fact that local housing authority went through a variety of personnel changes.
Just a reminder, that's a domino effect, because now that's made the town late on our audit as well, because EPHA is a component part of our audit. We don't like being late at turning in our audit either.
Yeah,
So I think maybe looking at the auditors might be a good thing to consider if they can't get it done on time.
so I want to offer some additional context that I think is important. One, I'm gonna be pretty blunt here. I ruffled some serious feathers over the last few weeks with Loveland Housing Company. Because I've been pushing very hard to get the audit completed. And substantially, one of my last communications was I stated at the end of last year and again at the beginning of this year that we could not be in the same position that we were in for 2024. And yet, here we are. It is a joint effort. There's joint culpability. Some is placed with the auditors, some is also placed with the LHA. I know I keep saying this, but I do believe firmly we're on a better path. The system conversion will have a significant impact on the ability to answer auditors' questions, have them accurate financials. We work in a dinosaur of a system that is not user friendly. The attached did their own conversion, and so it's a big lift. Ours is similar in stature and nature to that. And that will have a pretty impact. There was a few weeks of this delay that I also believe were simply a miss on LHA's side and a communication miss. As I try to feather and keep those relationships alive. In a follow-up of mine, it came to light that LHA thought they were waiting on me for something. They were not waiting on me. And that caused an additional few week delay that didn't need to occur because I had already given approval to go final. But LHA was not aware of that. I didn't communicate it to the auditing firm. Once the auditing firm got the word to go final, it still took them about 2 weeks, but that is their normal process. I do have a level of confidence that the auditing firm is on top of it, and going into next year, we will be positioned not a year. Hopefully I don't have to eat those words next year, but I'll do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen. I did want to acknowledge that I pushed as hard as I absolutely could, and to be truthful, I damaged that relationship with the The only final note I'll make is I don't want it to seem like I'm because it's not. The team and I had a meeting about 2 weeks ago. This is not the first time we've done this. We've done it a number of times, but we held a pretty significant financial meeting where I made sure that the leadership team was all aware of where we stood, how we got into the nitty-gritty, how financials work, how statements work. If you remember, still a recovering accountant. So this is something I'm quite comfortable. It's in my wheelhouse. So we went through explanations of how financial statements work, how our purchase order process should work, what we need to be paying attention to on a day-to-day basis, and how those day-to-day decisions and actions that we make choosing to repair, replace, what kind of flooring options we have, all those items, wrap up into the quarterly and annual financials. And we don't have the luxury of operating in the red because there's very thin margins here. We have to operate in the black and be able to support the top lines when they do arise. So we'll have ongoing conversations as the team really plays a much more significant role in the day-to-day management of the financial success of each individual property. So we're making sure that everyone has the resources they need to make the decisions they need to make day in, day out. That results in strong financial positions for our office. I can move on to 6E cash flow. It is fully reconciled through July. Reserve for replacement or owner controlled reserves. Thank you. You're welcome.
Any other questions? Comments? Jim? Relevant updates.
Real quick. 6E cash flow reconciled through July. So those numbers are up to date through that time frame. Questions? Let me know. Next, beginning in September, I think you will start to see the forward-looking 2027 anticipated cash flow for 6E. And collections are still coming in strong. Remember how much we're above do you Carly and San Diego. I think Q&A like 80%.
I thought we were closer to 10.
Closer to 10 potentially. So the lodging tax collection has been strong. Take that away as the takeaway. But we still have some big months in front of us in terms of collections.
One of the questions that where it came from is that the town is going to be hiring for the EPHA grant, grant writer. Is that in fact the case?
So right now, we already have a grant specialist that's on staff, and that role has significantly supported both housing and childcare initiatives through multiple DOLA grants. And so moving into next year, a quarter of that position will be funded by $60. So that was in the annual funding plan that you saw that, and it'll be about 40,000, I think, what was proposed in that. And again, that'll go through the full town budget process this fall. And that's just to kind of recognize.
That was not clear is what I did.
Okay.
And where I don't know where.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be in there, and that'll show up in the same way that my position funding is pulled, which is in that January statement. The town retains my salary and operations and overhead, and then it'll be this additional quarter of a position.
Okay, it wasn't clear that it was just a quarter of a position. They want to 60 money would be used to hire a grant writer.
Okay, I'll add some clarity to that sentence.
Not going to be just doing housing stuff, but they're going to be doing community development, streets.
Yeah, I think the other quarter is transportation is going to come from the parking and transportation budget. And
there's a whole spectrum of the grant writer.
Right, and we want that position to be funded by the people who they're doing for us.
We're reaping the benefits.
So it's
of
not
her
subsidized
amazing hard
either
work.
by 6E or by transportation. They pay their fair share. Basically. Yeah. No, I'll make sure that that's in there. But that, I know that's the intention. I might add one other thing about that. When we look at that position in general, we also expect it to bring in enough income to support the expense of having a grant money. And, in my experience, both here and at the county, it was a good investment. Cause there's an art to grant writing. And, somebody who knows how to do it can do it a lot faster, be a lot more effective than the staff bumbling through trying to do something they don't know how to do.
And they brought in $200,000 just this year for housing and childcare initiatives.
Good investment.
Yeah.
One final thing before we move on to Pete, sorry, just to make sure it's super clear. The 2025 financial audit is complete. It is in your packet. I also have a handful of copies over here. It's a lengthy document, so I can print a bunch. But if you would like a paper copy, there are paper copies here. If we run out, it's already posted and available online, or I can get you a paper copy. So just want to share that.
Well, updates. Scott's gonna handle that for you in general.
Oh, geez, no, I failed miserably. Goodness gracious.
Push my table for if you don't mind.
Go for it, please.
All right, so starting with Fall River Village, our town board hearing on July 28th ended with a split 3-3 vote for the amended PUD. And
Sorry.
the final decision was pushed until a time when all parties are present. So we are scheduled for town board project review on August 25th. So that is next Tuesday. Despite the surprising verdict, we are confident that the approval will occur at our next meeting. I've updated the presentation and we're going to discuss the purposes and intent of a PUD, as well as how waiver requests are a necessary part of a PUD. So made a comment in there, if there were no waivers, there would be no reason to go through a PUD. And this is pulled directly from the development code regarding standards for review for a PUD. Provisions of attainable workforce or employee housing or other housing solutions that support the housing element of the comprehensive plan. So that is a standard for review and an intent of the code. And we're also going to compare the waivers of the current PUD to the one that we are proposing, because that was something that came into question during the hearing. So, for example, if we get through here, it'll be clear that the current PUD has many more significant exemptions than what we are asking for. So, for example, Scott,
Excuse me, you can be talking about this for a while.
for this.
Will you just waive it? I really shouldn't sit in on it.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Just realize that.
I'll just be in the hallway, just wait. I'll come back. We'll come back.
I'll come get you.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, Skyview itself, that building is a waiver. Per the terms of the existing development code, that building should not exist. It has both a height exception, 8 feet over the allowable height, which we know is big faux pas nowadays. And it also has a size exception, as it's an accessory building over 1,000 square feet. They also have a density bonus waiver as well that allows 6 more units than the current code requires or allows. So I think as we compare our waivers, it's pretty clear that the waiver requests that we are proposing are quite minuscule in comparison to the current PUD that was approved. So I think that, can answer the question of whether or not the housing authority receives different treatment compared to the private development. I think it certainly demonstrates that we do not receive preferential treatment. If anything, there's likely more scrutiny that we receive through these public hearings and in front of town board. So other parts of the presentation will review the intent of the PUD and how supporting workforce and affordable housing align with the purpose and intent of PUD. I just read. It's important to note that community development staff found only advantages and no disadvantages in their report to town board, and planning commission also voted to recommend approval to town board for nothing. So it was surprising that town board went against planning staff and planning commission to not vote for approval of the PUD.
Excuse me, but what was, since the vote was 3-3, Very expanding and everyone else was pretty in favor of. What were some of the main objections?
Fact that we were requesting waivers as part of the PUD and whether or not we were getting preferential treatment. It's my understanding.
I had a conversation with the mayor. Pointed out, and he was that celebrating the temple. It's terrible. They made a decision to go ahead with this particular kind of path. And what we needed to have was fulfillment of the agreement that the town, previous town board made in order to enhance and have the process go through. So just taking through the details that needed to happen. And he was speaking with spoken to the new trustees in relationships to what the past did. This is a pattern that has continued for the last 25 years. Brand new town board changes stuff, doesn't complete stuff, was done by the previous one. So he was pointing out to them that was there, in fact, there was to continue to work with what the previous town board had done in relationship to this particular. So,
I think it's also just a general lack of understanding of PUDs and waivers for those new board members. They just didn't have like the background or the knowledge of how those things work. And so they just needed a moment maybe to be advised or talk to or people around them to help them understand what a PUD is and what waivers are used for.
Yeah, I agree with both of those statements, and I think isolation of what town board committed to previously, this application in the standalone isolation fits what they're looking for from the PUD, from all the requirements. So, yeah, like I said, I expected it to be 7-0 or 6-1. So I was very surprised, and I think the merits of the PUD stand well on its own.
Can I add two things? I think one, agreed with everything I was just saying. There was a substantive question raised about not only is a housing authority application getting preferential treatment, but it was more based, in my opinion, on why would a development or a PUD be approved that doesn't fit the development code? And it's explained a little bit differently by a trustee, but that was substantively the question that was being raised. And I am in favor of approving something that fits the development code. I don't understand the benefit or the need to approve something outside the development code. He just explained the whole purpose of PUDs is in essence to go outside of the development code. It is actually more risky for a developer to do that. But it's meant to provide a pathway to unique projects, unique parcel agreement, unique. And then substantively in the current development code, there's a substantial section in the current development code which calls out the need for public benefit and consideration of approval. And if this isn't the public benefit, I don't know how else to define. So the technical, that's why I'm a little bit surprised. I mean, I'm taking on a quick tangent, Pete. I'm sorry to break in here, but before I forget to pose the question before. In Colorado, the town board or other municipality has 30 days to make a decision on a PUD application. That 30-day mark is next Tuesday. It was extended or continued by town board to last town board meetings because essentially they took no action on the PUD because there was a tie vote. So in real terms, that meant they took no action, so they continued it.
Right.
Because they didn't vote to approve or deny. So it's still we were not available as applicants to be present at the continued meeting. We both had commitments or preceded that continuation and did not alter our plans to be present. So I made a request to extend it to next meeting, which is next Tuesday. That is the day that the town board has to make a decision on our application, either for or against it. If they do not take action at that meeting, then the PUD would automatically be approved by state statute. I anticipate us being presented with a request to extend my stance, but I wanted to get this board's thoughts. My stance would be, as an applicant, I would be willing to extend an equal amount of time from the extension that we requested, which was 2 weeks. So a 1 more meeting cycle, if it's determined it's needed. Quite frankly, we need action on this application. We're already about 60 days later than we anticipated being. And we need to be able to, because we've already taken action, to be prepared to take the next steps, should the PUD be approved. That is obviously a very politically sensitive question, both in real terms and visibility and just optics in general. If you chose to not to extend, we would essentially be either offering up greater chances for denial or putting handcuffs on town board in a sense that says if you approve, we'll just delay it. It'll automatically.
Scott, I mean, as Pete said earlier, it was a surprise. And I think that with, as Stacy said, a little clarification on PUDs, which are actually very good. I personally think they need to act on in 2 weeks. I mean, you tie first, now you get an explanation. Now you want to tell us a decision, which would be hopefully in our favor. We're not getting anything. We're not being favorably treated in this thing. You know, and you're not doing it, it hasn't been agreed to that. Yeah, exactly, right. I mean, they're costing us time and dollars just by sitting there not doing anything. And I think what Stacy's correct, those that are new on the board need some education. And the mayor is doing mayor. What needs to be done.
I also think though, like politicking, right?
Yeah.
That's how this all works.
Right.
Is that if they ask for extension, it's reasonable to let them have another week or two, whatever we extended. If you feel like forcing that decision would not end up in our favor. So I think that's a judgment in the moment
Yeah,
by you and Pete.
sure. That's not what's being said at the
Yeah.
board meeting.
Anything else on? Appreciate. Oh, I'm sorry, going forward.
Just one last paragraph down here. So, as noted in the previous update, we will engage a contractor to complete the necessary prior blocking and run approval of the EPHA substation.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I already forgot. Jeez.
See it, well,
Okay, we're going siren. Yeah. Sorry, believe it.
So fish hatchery is in there. Fish hatchery, currently the biggest question mark is the water distribution plan. We're in active conversations with the town water department and the town manager's office as we try to work through the details. Currently, all of the efforts of this project are focused on this. We have yet to have a clear explanation of what aspects the water department objects to. We've asked for O&M data for ever since April, and we're still waiting to receive that, although there's been no indication that they will share it. So they were previously open to the pump station from October 2025 to April 2026. And those conversations really started in late summer, so even before October. This is, a previous board updates that I provided discussed. the most recent offer to the water department was to place 3 years of operational maintenance expense for the pump station that we will also pay to construct, along with a commitment to ensure that at least 2 years of operational expenses are placed in escrow at all times. We'll see what the next steps are.
I find it interesting that the town water department or particular as water department that goes to 25. And yet we have no answer to our questions on how much land that the town wants us to develop. Or else. I think there's some additional need. And maybe Frank, you can ask some questions about this because it's important to us for this development to go to the town. Stems. We should have what 24 months. Provided by whatever. And we were sort of at this stage. So we need to, for me to have some sort of definitive answer from what they're going to support. How much is the town willing to contribute towards building and developing whatever it is that they want us to actually do with this particular department. So I think that all of changed the old design, whatever it was. So I think we need some.
Let me make some comments. I can follow up on that one.
I'm going to excuse myself for this discussion. I think to the boring of you. As I have a conflict of interest. Forget to come and get you.
I should say day one.
Lunch is served at noon.
8:30 Marina Ave. So our application for the Prop 123 land banking funds was submitted on May 26th, so almost 3 months ago at this point. Updated communication with EPHA indicates that the fund will be awarded as soon as this week, and in theory, no later than the end of the month. So fingers crossed here, we will be hearing pretty soon, one way or the other. Been a lot of anticipation about this one. So due to the delay in hearing from EPHA and the uncertainty of receiving the award, we've also engaged banks for approximately a 60% loan to cost land loan for the property. And this means the housing authority would provide approximately $1.5 million and the lender would provide approximately $2.1 million in funds. I met with the Bank of Colorado and A&D Bank. I also reached out to a contact at Huntington Bank as well for the loan. Bank of Colorado and A&D Bank are active in reviewing the material that we provided. And at this point, even if we do get the award from EPHA, we'll either need the seller to extend a couple months, which doesn't necessarily sound that promising at this point. Or at minimum, we might need to get a bridge loan for 3 to 4 months because even when EPHA provides the award, it was saw with the forward village equity contribution. The gap between award and closing was probably close to 7 or 9 months. So with having just about 30 days or a little bit more from once we hear from EPHA when the closing date is, we won't be able to close on the shack funds at that point. So we'll likely need, unless we get an extension, we'll likely need to coordinate with those banks further. From the design, we have engaged Steve Lane with Basis Architecture to develop a yield study to help determine the density and high-level design on the property. The goal will be to take the information to the town for a pre-application meeting prior to closing on the property. The goal is to get as much insight and information as possible. I've already done a fair bit of reaching out to the various departments just to check a handful of boxes. For example, the water pressure. So there is it's an 8-inch water line currently in Marine Ave, and that water pressure is 190 PSI. So we are in good shape for water on this parcel. So through this process, we're hoping to uncover as much information and as many roadblocks as possible early in the process. Steve Lane's knowledge and experience in the Estes Valley will be really helpful in this process as well. So the design work will begin once the survey that's currently underway is received. I spoke to the surveyor yesterday. They anticipated that either the end of this week or early next week. And so once that is received, it'll allow the design work to get underway. It's that's important as it shows the actual parcel boundaries, topography, and easements. So some of the main constraints that need to be designed around. We're also in conversation with our attorney, Jim Martell, regarding House Bill 26-1001 and how it can be applied at this property. This was new legislation that the state of Colorado passed this year, which provides qualifying entities such as the Housing Authority to develop affordable housing in areas that are not naturally zoned for affordable housing. So this parcel is zoned commercial outlying, which is not zoned for multifamily use, but can be used for multifamily through either PUD or the utilization of that new House bill. So again, going back to the surprising outcome of the agree to revoke for Fall River Village, we're concerned with the political risk of the PUD vote at the board level. As we talked about above, for Fall River Village, community development staff found only advantages and no disadvantages in their report. And the planning commission voted to recommend approval to town board at 3-0. However, town board didn't approve the amended PUD. So there's risk, even if we follow all of the right steps from community development and the planning commission, it could, stop at town board, which would be pretty problematic as that's a year and a half and a few $100,000 to design most likely. So as with all risks in the pre-development stage, it's necessary to be active to minimize all risks, which is why utilizing House Bill 26-1001 might be preferable to pursuing the for the development itself. We're focused on 9% light tech deals in order to provide rental opportunities for those incomes at 60% below. Ideally, the blended AMI rate, as spoken town board a handful of presentations ago, would roughly be 45 to 49% blended AMI. So it allows us to serve more than 30, 40, and 50% AMI levels, which is a big need for the community, particularly as Fall River Village and Beaver Brook were mainly targeted at that 60 to 80% AMI level. So to provide housing throughout all ranges of the housing spectrum, low income, middle income, as long as we're below that 80%, and also the attainable for sale. So the 9% tool drives greater affordability than the 4% low income housing tax credits, which is why we are targeting the 9% rather than 4%. Anything to add?
No, nothing to add. Well, I guess, yes. We're getting to brass tacks time on closing as the scheduled for 9:30. So Pete and I, Jim Martell, will be able to some of the challenges as we get a little bit closer to closing. So as we know more and have some solutions, hopefully to bear, we'll communicate that those to this board. I would anticipate hopefully not in September because it's probably a little too early for our regular scheduled board meeting because it's a little on the earlier side with the calendar calls, I think. But we may have to hold a special meeting before closing for a final decision of this board to give us approval to close on the deal. But as we go concerned of some financial terms and parameters that could look like being communicated with you all. That's all I got on the building. Thank you, Jess.
Thanks for remembering me. Street.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot, that is me. Winsfield hosted, some public open houses a couple months ago, to garner community feedback on potential redevelopment of the 3 parcels in Cleve, to include retail, parking, new housing, and some additional housing as well. So they held, 2 more community sessions a few weeks ago now, to really just provide, an update to what the community outreach efforts and the online survey sort of revealed. So they presented those that was in your packet as a link because it's a giant file, because the architecture put together, so it's very graphic heavy. So I couldn't include it as a attachment, but they provided, again, 2 public sessions to go over the results of the public outreach, what people in the community said they wanted to see, what they didn't want to see. And I think it was fruitful information. There were also a few additional renderings that had not been provided in the past, just regarding the concept. I think 2 of those were pretty impactful as they show from the north side of the Bighorn looking south, what the development would, what the proposed development would look like. And then another one, if you go a little bit further, driving south along Bighorn, make that turn not far from where that single cabin is on the east side of Bighorn Drive. Probably about there is where that perspective was, or just looking basically straight west. So kind of that's probably the most visually impactful spot, is right in that 80-yard area along Bighorn there. So those 2 perspectives I think were new and were good to see sort of visually what that impact could be. So hopefully you have a chance to look at it. If not, click that link. It'll take you to a copy of their presentation. Winsfield continues to sort of be the driving force in terms of exploring financial options. I think Walt is attempting to get a good grasp on what options exist, given all the parties at play, before we jump back into substantive conversations about what the legal framework will look like, because the financial options could largely drive some aspects of it, potential legal arrangement. So that's why we're still just sort of working behind the scenes to see what framework proposals could come forward based on those findings. So that's kind of where we are. If not in our capital needs assessments. Oh, we did. Oh, great. So we've received the capital needs assessment reports. We haven't had a chance to review them internally. So hopefully in subsequent months, we'll be able to share some of that information with them. What we've learned. And that will allow us to begin more substantive capital rehab for Lone Tree, because sort of capital needs projects. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, housing program updates.
Jeff had to jump out, as we're kind of without home at the moment.
Yeah.
So he's, Wendy's now doing training for our system. Jeff's helping the office move folks. So he's going to hopefully have an opportunity to review it. He's working with a new property management company that took over 6 workforce properties in the valley. So just walking them through the process. No new traditional DPA assistance applications have been received. We are working with a current recipient or loan holder who is technically in violation of that down payment assistance loan. We're working with him to rectify that issue. I put a pause, as I told you all about in email communication. Once we received the PUD decision, applicant decision, we were preparing to go live with our internet down payment assistance. I chose to pause on going live for essentially cash preservation strategy, in case we need to make other decisions, with the available funds as it relates to Fall River Village. So, we'll go ahead and go live with that after we get a positive decision as it relates to Fall River Village, but I thought it prudent to hold those funds just in case there's going to be a draw on those funds.
Okay, I think that's a wise decision. Hold on for cash for a little bit longer.
And let me provide just a little more context as to why and the impact that Fall River had and the idea to reserve cash. The break glass in case of emergency at Fall River Village, this is one of the reasons that we were, in my estimation, able to get the type of funding that we did. And that is the amount of security that stopped a really non-traditional financing deal. And the break glass in case of emergency was that in theory, we could keep Fall River Village as it exists today without selling any units, but that would mean that we couldn't do anything else outside of some administrative support with 60 funds for probably about 6 years. And that is not how we make housing occur. You have to leverage all the opportunities you have in front of you. And housing takes a long time to develop and bring to market. So that was never viewed as the front primary solution set, but was a fallback in terms of security, that if everything else should fall apart, we could technically take funds from 60 to buy down debt to eventually refinance and make that be long-term sustainable, but that is not how we leverage funds in the best manner possible. So that's how that all works together. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't think anything else on the programming side. Yep, that's just.
All right, so the team's doing really well with delinquencies. I feel they've got a good handle on it. The month ended at 38,000 delinquencies, with 25 of that being our current residents, 12 being former past residents. Vacancies, we ended the month with 11 vacancies. 4 move-ins occurred within the month of July. Out of those 11 vacancies, 5 of them are currently on hold for various reasons. 1 still exploring the possibility of a childcare up at Fall River, and then 4 units now being held for potential sale. 6 are other properties. That's kind of the vacancy total across all of our properties. For Fall River Village Lower specifically, this will probably be the last time that I have it kind of separated out as its own report. We're at 100% occupancy within since the month of July, so that was great news, great accomplishment by everybody involved. So kudos to them. We did 2 move-ins in the month of July there at the lower level. Fall River Village, we've already kind of touched on seasonal housing, so I can skip over that. We have 13 units that do occupy for seasonal housing, and the team is preparing for 6 of those to be departing in the next kind of tiers. I think we've got some move out at the end of August, and then another group leaves at the end of September, October. They just kind of start leaving and going back home. So we're preparing to flip those. Audits are very heavy right now. I think on every property that we could have an audit and an inspection and file reviews, we're doing it this year. So I just had a CHAPA physical walkthrough at Talon's Point yesterday with CHAPA, and just few minor repairs or findings for some outlets that we need to get replaced. So they're always impressed with our properties and the conditions. We always get a really good write-up as a closeout letter from CHAPA physical audits. Pete and I are kind of working together for the capital needs assessment. And let's see, audits. Tax point, well, we haven't got our file review, so now that we just had our physical review yesterday, we're waiting to hear from the file auditor to pull our files for that Talon's Point.
Is Susie doing that stuff?
For this one, I don't believe, I think Susie's like 15, in the year 15, she's over Falcon
So someone different is doing it.
Yeah, and like Kelly oversees Fall River Village, Lower, so we're pending with those files as well. So currently Falcon Ridge is pending files, we've submitted our files for Falcon Ridge and for Fall River Lower. And it's up to the auditor to get back the results to us. The 2 new members are still doing a fantastic job. We've, the office staff's currently taking on a huge project for the 2026 waiting list purge. So we're cleaning up our waiting list. Our office manager is doing that currently this week. That is her goal, is to get as much of it updated in our old system before we freeze that data and bring it over to Yardi. So we have the most up-to-date information that we're starting fresh when we go to the new system in October. And then I'm started to work with Efficiency Works, that last bullet point, on an assessment for energy efficiency programs. This is a Platte Valley grant out there. We worked with this company a couple of years ago when we updated all of our LED lights across all of our properties. I know that we went into Talon's Point, Pines, Cleve Street, and Lone Tree, our older properties. They came in and we had all of our lights updated to LED. So it's kind of the same process. They're asking lots of questions about operations and how many doors we have and how things, and then they'll come back with an assessment. We'll probably do a property walkthrough here in the next couple of weeks for how we can, it's more focused on utilities this time around. So we can come down on our costs for utilities. So that's what I'm working on with them. Yes.
Question. I know that when you say delinquent situation, how much have we charged off? Because I know there's a point in time when we say, okay, we're done, or turn it over, and
That we write off to
Yeah.
collections, is
Yeah.
that
yeah.
I did not
Would you-
update that as part of Q2's financials,
Yeah.
so I can have that number on.
Okay, well,
I can, yeah.
that's fine. Yeah, like, just an idea.
Yeah.
That we're. Anything else?
That is it over there.
Before we move on to the kids, I would just want to comment. This will shakes work for each and every keep seeing every once in a while, like you see little Facebook post, so-and-so did such and such, and thank you very much. And it came from one, I think it was Joe, that made the last Facebook post that I saw of, thank you very much for one of the tenants, for his kindness, the work that he did in a timely manner. And I think that particular spirit goes across our organization to one of the people. Just want to make sure that everyone is aware of how appreciative this board is of the people who work for the That's
We'll make sure the team receives that message.
thank you very much. Before we move on to under old business, where are we with appointments?
Yeah. It's kind of on hold until, the board next Tuesday is gonna talk about, do they want to change the makeup or do anything different with the appointments?
Which means what? Yeah.
I don't know. I think there is some, there are 2 options. One would be to replace the board with the town board. The other one would be, legally, they can appoint a maximum of one town board member to be on the board.
So what to do?
That's all they can do.
That's one more. It's my understanding that you cannot replace this board with the town board because there has been no malfeasance on the part of this board or no.
Yeah, it would have to be something that's phased in. We would have to get legal advice on that. I don't think that's an option that's gonna go very far. And I don't know if anyone is even proposing that. The idea of putting one person on the board,
I served,
don't know.
I served in that as a trustee.
actually as a member of the board.
As a member of the board.
And so we
I
can,
found it conflicting because there would be items that would be brought to the town board. So housing that I had to recuse myself.
Yeah.
And then what items brought to this board from the town. The town, I had to recuse myself from dealing with it on this. So,
personally, in my opinion of it, I don't see how that's an advantage over having a liaison.
No.
I think the liaison relationship is better. If the rest of the board decided to do that, we would probably do away with the liaison position. There's no reason to have someone on the board and have a liaison. There are a couple boards where, by their bylaws, town board members are members. Visit Us Park is a good one. There's two town board members. We have no liaison to Visit Us Park, but we have two town board members are on there. By definition, the Platte Power Authority has the mayor and one other's town representative is actually on the board. So we'll see where the discussion is. The board did assign myself and Mark Eichel to do the interviews. We had 14 applications. I've gone through those, looked at them, kind of got my idea, just kind of ranking of how we're going to do it. I don't think I would prefer not to interview all 14. Screen it down a little bit. And I think you could do that. Any kind of job application, most people do that, just interview everybody who happens to apply. Because there were a few on the bottom end that I don't think would be there. I did share those with Scott. And we're not gonna have Scott or a member of this board sit in on the interviews, but I did ask Scott to look at them and make comments. Because I do appreciate the input and I want to hear any thoughts on any of the applicants. If there's part of it, what I look at on a board like this is what expertise holes do you have? What are the needs? And if we have a need for somebody who has this kind of background, let's try to fit that niche because we want to have this broad base here as well. So there are a lot of good people on there, but somebody might be just duplicating a skill we already have. So I might want to go to somebody else. And that's where I look to Scott. And I also don't want to naively appoint somebody who's been opposed to the organization or has been a problem or there's any kind of insight. That doesn't mean that we're going to take it, whatever Scott recommends. I mean, there's still our decision who gets there on the board. But I asked for the input, so Scott's going to get some of that to me.
Yeah, to be clear, we will, so Pete and I both looked at them. And we will provide any recommendations. We're just going to provide insight based on experience with this board needs in terms of experience, expertise, and you and Mark sort of walk through that in combination with the interviews to get it so you deem fit.
And so we'll do the interviews and then, which is another reason I don't want to do 14 because that would stretch it out longer. By the time you schedule them and get it all going for 14 different people who are busy individuals. Then we take it back to the board recommendation from the two of us for the board, and then the full board will make a decision.
Do we think we'll be through that process by the end of September?
I think so. I hope to be through, we really need to get you up to speed, up to full.
We have a full board.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I wanted to draw attention to, just because it could get lost in all of these conversations, is again, housing authorities answer to a lot of different folks. And by state statute, we now, because of our size, we also have to have a member of our board who is actively being served by EPHA. Typically, that is a resident, but not always. So Stacy serves that role now.
As they say that, we've got that.
We have
covered,
that
right?
now.
Right.
It's just a topic of conversation as we talk about the bank of people. That's a sugar requirement now to bring certain size.
Are there any others that I don't know about that we should be,
I think that's,
there's no certain slots were required, a lot are required.
I think that's,
Right.
Once you pass 3 units, we're required to engage someone receiving services from the entity. Then Stacy.
But Stacy's got us covered, so I think we're got this.
Are you gonna take off that loan?
So you can't leave.
okay.
Any other questions about the interview or what we're doing from the? Okay. Sure. Sorry, it's been taking so long.
Yes, swinging, it works.
Sometimes government goes slow.
Those. Report, Scott, postponed until September. Office move is scheduled.
It's happening now. We are currently almost.
I would entertain a motion to move into executive session for conferences with our attorney for a local public body for purposes of receiving legal advice on specifically the question under CRS section 24-6-42, in regards to Estes Park Ordinance 11.5.
I'll put forth that motion.
I'll second. And second, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for participating. We will be coming back into session, of our executive meeting.
And I don't think I should be here.
That's what's
I'm Quigley.